Ken Delanian, you broke this news for our network. Tell us more about the development, about what danger we're in here on our mainland, and about how the intelligence agencies seem to continue to be blindsided by the speed with which the North Koreans are hitting these benchmarks and these milestones in their nuclear program.
Yeah, Nicole, there's no doubt that this is happening earlier than people had expected. And look, North Korea is the toughest spying target that exists in the world. Intelligence officials will tell you that. We have no embassy in North Korea. It's not like we can send agents there. The communications intercept capability is limited because society is not even really connected by the internet. So this is a hard target. And that brings up a point here. What we're talking about is an assessment. It's not proof. It's an estimate of where U.S. intelligence officials think North Korea is along the nuclear continuum. That said, it's a significant development that U.S. officials believe that North Korea has successfully miniaturized a nuclear weapon to the point that they could place it on an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. And we know from the test last month that a North Korean missile could potentially hit the United States. Now, does that mean they have a nuclear-armed missile ready to fire at Chicago? No, it doesn't, my sources tell me, because there are other aspects of the technology cycle they have not perfected, including re-entry, the ability to make sure that the missile and the warhead gets through the atmosphere without disintegrating. That said, this is a hugely significant development, and it really puts the pressure on the Trump administration to come up with a policy solution to what is the most intractable, difficult situation in foreign affairs. Nicole.
Keir, when you were here last week, we talked about sort of the grim reality of going to war with a regime like North Korea, and that to put American lives in danger, to put the lives of our allies in South Korea in danger, he doesn't actually have to successfully land a missile on the continental U.S. He has targets much closer, and there are thousands of Americans much closer. Talk about that a little bit.
That's absolutely right. I mean, there are almost 30,000 American servicemen and women on the Korean Peninsula, and of course that doesn't include the ordinary Americans, many who live there. Look, the president talked about fire and fury. Let's add another word: fear. We were, Nicole, monitoring the news services, the news channels around the world, here in Europe, in the Middle East, in Russia, for example, and the difference between the way that they were reporting the news coming from the U.S. of the new assessment of North Korea's nuclear missile capability. That was reported intermittently on those channels, but the president's threat, if you like, is now leading many of the stations around the world, because what will really worry many governments, and particularly in that region, and we've talked about it, Nicole, is the escalation, is the idea that the U.S. feels it has to act, that North Korea then feels it has to respond, and that what you end with is, for example, North Korea firing the fearsome artillery that it has along the border into Seoul, hundreds of thousands, possibly more, being killed. And that's a scenario even without the potential for some kind of a nuclear strike by either side. So it is an issue that is getting government's attention, it's getting population's attention around the world, but it's not quite seen, as you might expect, in the same way, from the same angle as it is from Washington.
Peter Baker, can you jump in and pick up on Keir's point about fear? Was the president's strategy, first of all, let me ask you, was it a strategy? Was his statement something that was crafted with the help and support of people like General Kelly, his new chief of staff, and General McMaster, his national security advisor?
Well, look, we know that General Kelly has been here basically almost the entire time since President Trump arrived for vacation in New Jersey, working vacation on Friday. He was meeting with him on this opioid crisis along with other aides. And they had to know they were going to be asked this question, of course. So you would think that there had been some consultation about what it was he was going to say. Having said that, the tone of the language, you know, most presidents try to express firmness, try to express, you know, the idea of resolute response to try to make sure that North Korea understands the stakes involved in these types of moments. Fire and fury takes it to a next level. The colorful nature of the language, the evocative nature, almost suggesting a nuclear holocaust, goes beyond what previous presidents, I think, have said out loud, and really does ratchet up the kind of tensions in a visceral way.
Peter Baker, what are the consequences of talking about fire and fury, a either accidental or intentional allusion to what you just described, nuclear power? I have never heard a modern American president threaten fire and fury and, frankly, power the likes of which this world has never seen. And I guess I just want to stay on this question about whether this was a statement recommended by, approved by, condoned by, recommended by Generals McMaster or Kelly.
Well, we'll have to do some more reporting on that, I think. But it did look like he was reading from something. It did look like he was saying something that had been intended to be said. And I think that you're right about that. I haven't heard another president use this type of language, certainly not in a long time. And it is very evocative. I think the calculation here is that Kim Jong-un understands force, understands strength, and that's all he understands. And therefore, it's incumbent on the American president to be as clear and threatening as possible so that there is no misunderstanding, because other presidents have clearly been reluctant to get involved in a war in Korea for good reason. Now, whether this means this president would be willing to do that, obviously we don't know. H.R. McMaster, the general who is his national security advisor, was interviewed on MSNBC over the weekend by Hugh Hewitt, and did say that military options are definitely on the table. He seemed to go beyond the ritualistic, yes, of course it's on the table, but we're not really planning to use it kind of language we hear from the White House. And so these are moments that
Peter,
are kind of tense.
Peter, let me play that. Peter, let me play that, and we'll talk about it on the other end. Here it is. Here's H.R. McMaster, the comments Peter just referenced.
What you're asking is are we preparing plans for a preventive war, right? A war that would prevent North Korea from threatening the United States with a nuclear weapon. And the president's been very clear about it. He said he's not going to tolerate North Korea being able to threaten the United States. Look at the nature of that regime. If they have nuclear weapons that can threaten the United States, it's intolerable from the president's perspective. So of course, we have to provide all options to do that. And that includes a military option.
So, Peter, to your point, abundantly clear that they have prepared at least a military option should the president choose to go in that direction.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Look, you can't make this bluff work if it is a bluff unless you are prepared to take action. Now, the question is, what would trigger that action? We've already seen several red lines crossed in the 6 months of this administration. The test seemingly successful of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Now this discussion about whether a warhead might actually fit on that missile. I mean, as Ken said earlier, that's not the final stage of creating a nuclear-capable weapon that could hit the United States, but it does take the tension level much higher.
Ken, what do the intelligence agencies tell you about the degree of difficulty of actually, before you can launch a military attack, you have to be able to locate the sites that would prevent North Korea from being able to reassemble its nuclear program? How good is our intelligence about North Korea's nuclear program and their military sites?
It's not very good, Nicole, is my understanding. And further, it would be extremely difficult for the U.S. to take out the artillery pieces buried in rock and arrayed against Seoul. In fact, one official told me last week that nothing short of a nuclear strike would make sure that those were eliminated. And so you're going to have a situation with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of civilians killed if North Korea responds to any American strike with an artillery barrage on Seoul. It's just a really thorny and difficult military situation, which is why experts on our air all day have been saying the proper response to this is deterrence. As to if North Korea is a nuclear power, then the United States needs to approach it and send the message that any use of those nuclear weapons would be the end of your regime, and we negotiate from that position. But the Trump administration policy is not that. It's that this is intolerable. We will not accept North Korea having a nuclear threat against American cities. Nicole.
Keir Simmons, let me give you the last word. What does the world hear when American officials talk about that which is intolerable and make clear that military options are on the table?
Well, the world hears an impending crisis, and what it doesn't hear is certainty. What actually